Hello and welcome to another episode of the Bazaar Overexplained. I am the Bazaar Whisperer, and today I'm going to be giving you my first impressions of Season 5 with all of the incredible new changes that we've seen in this latest patch. And within this video, I'm going to be kind of giving a lot of my personal opinions about what has been going on and kind of talk about overall how the meta has shifted. I've been a legend player for the Bazaar for the entirety of its run here, so I've seen a lot of what the game has to offer, and I think where we're heading is in a pretty good spot. But let's dive in to all the different things here, starting first with Stelle. So I've just popped into the Discord server here for the Bazaar. In the post your build section, you can see that there's certainly a lot of people playing Stelle, and I think she's pretty fun. This is really interesting with the character that you kind of make these I don't know, I want to say like powerful engines, even though that's sort of what we're already doing in the Bazaar, as we're just making engine items and things, or a combination of items that all work together as a big engine. But in Stell's case, it really feels more like we're kind of building into these like one powerful synergy item, and then with that you kind of try and support that synergy with a lot of other smaller, maybe like less impactful items, I want to say. You generally have like a primary damage dealer, and then you build around that with whatever synergy it's looking for. But there's a lot of cool ways to utilize that. You can even see something like a wrecking ball where you're starting and stopping flying so that you can get it going off very frequently, and then you have other ways to help facilitate that to go off. Yeah, overall, I really enjoy where Stelle is at as a character. And if you want to look at all the Stelle items, there's a couple places to do it. Well, I'll link below is this Mobalytics article that is Stelle's upcoming release, and it has released, so that's awesome. Within this article, you can go through every single item that is in Stelle's pool and see what the author has written rather about this new expansion with all the Stelle items, and they give a really good job at kind of going item by item and telling you what they think about them and how they're all going to work together. I've done a couple of those videos in the past, but really I think after a couple of days here, it's more illuminating to kind of talk about how all these are playing together. But regardless, there's a lot of really cool items that Stelle has. I haven't used every single one of them, but I do want to talk about the flying mechanic. I think it's kind of hard to gauge how powerful this mechanic is in a vacuum when we saw it before, but seeing it play out, it seems like it itself is like not that flashy of a mechanic, but it really shines when you put it next to items that want to start or stop flying, and then they do a thing when they do that. This clause of here of an adjacent item starts flying, we're going to see that on a lot of different items. We're going to see that again on like the anemometer. There you go. Angle grinder drone is going to make an item fly. We're going to see it on like balloon engine. This comes up a lot. So there's a lot of ways to start and stop flying in Stelle's pool. And with that, that's where the flying trigger really comes into play. I think it's very useful and to know that, if you're just using the flying mechanic for its purpose of having your items be 50% less frozen or 50% less slowed, then yeah, that's not going to be super impactful. You don't want to use it for that. You really want to use it for items that start to care about an item doing the starting or stopping flying. And there's certainly just so many of those in Stelle's pool. We kind of see a couple different archetypes in Stelle. We have the start and stop flying, which goes into a couple different ones. It could be damage, it could be burn, but there's really kind of the three that stand out to me are shielding, big damage items, and then we also have burn. So there are a lot of really cool, powerful shield items that are on Stelle, and I think we can kind of see that the numbers for what these shield items have are pretty insane. So if you're wanting to try and counter Stelle right now, I would say that poison builds are really, really strong at the moment, just because they're going to be bypassing a lot of that shielding. I'm going to say it's not going to be as impactful in the late game because Stelle has some insane damage dealing items, even something like a battle drone, which we can see here that can have an obscene amount of multicast on it. It's going to do a lot of damage, so you're going to need to have some survivability. But overall, in the mid game, you can kind of bypass this 100 shielding sort of item here just by going poison build. So I imagine that's what we're going to see the meta shift to as the game progresses. One other thing to mention here about Stelle is that I think as a character, she has a really high ceiling and a really low floor. So it's easy to put a lot of items on your board that do very little and that you have like not the right synergy for. But if you're well versed in kind of how to build out that board correctly, then just the upside in ceiling that she can have in her builds is insanely powerful. We can see items like a Karakar and Chicken Cannon. They themselves are a little innocuous, but you start putting them next to the right sort of items here, and things go pretty crazy. Yeah, I'll again link this Mobalytics article down below for you to kind of check out all these items, and you can also do so on howbazaar.gg. And with that, also I can see some of my items here were also spoiled. Yeah, well, let's find one. Let's find one. Ice Bomb, cool. Yeah, the Bazaar Whisperer. Thanks for crediting me here in the article. I really appreciate you fine folks there at Mobalytics. Now I want to talk about what we have for Mak and Dooley. So they got a new expansion as well. Let's start with Mak first here. I want to say, up front here, they both introduced this flying mechanic into their pool. So they have a couple different items that are going to be flying in Mak and Dooley's item pool. But my first impression here is that truly like the flying mechanic in their pool is not that strong. There are some really key build around items that can take advantage of them in a very powerful way. We can see that in like the Sky Terror here, which says this starts or stops flying, and then when it starts flying, it gets a bunch of burn and damage. When it stops flying, it deals the damage. So there's like that sort of thing. But if you don't get the Sky Terror, which is a gold large item, which is not easy to find, then the flying doesn't really feel that impactful. You can find something like Orally, but again, I'm not really too impressed by the flying mechanic that's introduced into Mak's pool specifically, and Dooley's pool, to be frank with you. What I do like about Mak's items are that we do get things like Frozen Horror, which is really cool in that introduces this like enchant into a specific effect item like we have with our reagents. Well, this is now a reagent for freezing. We also similar have one for hasting and stuff like that. We can give turbo. So I think that's pretty cool that we're getting more of those unique enchants on different items. I think that's one of the most fun parts about playing Mak, is that you can get an item with just all sorts of different synergies and enchants on it pretty early on, and that's always a blast just to have those different enchants on the items. Overall, I would say that this expansion and frankly the Dooley expansion are not super big highlights. When I've been playing those heroes lately, I've kind of been defaulting back to some of the other builds that they've had on offer before. As I said, poison builds on Mak are going to be very powerful still, especially if everyone's trying out the new character with Stelle, and she doesn't do a lot of healing, she does a lot of shielding, so poison's going to be very good there. But yeah, overall, I think the items are cool. I think like even something like Gravestone is cool. But what you're going to see here is kind of this sort of clause. When you use a potion or a relic, another item starts flying. And when you use a flying item, gain 5 regen. And what I mean by that is it's going to care about flying, but it's more so going to care about flying in the context of that character when it comes to this Dooley and Mak expansion. So it's going to look for like a specific tag along with the flying thing. It's not kind of like its own standalone, only flying items caring about only other flying items, that sort of thing. But yeah, let's take a look at the Dooley items here real quick. I'm going to be honest, I like the Mak ones more than the Dooley ones, but just in gameplay wise of how they have panned out for me in my runs. But I will say, they are viable. It's just I don't think they're that powerful. I think Chaff is a pretty interesting one in that we can play it with like a Armadillo or something like that, where we're turning our burn into shielding, and that opens up some new lines for us. But when we're starting to look at items or like this hover tech, even the launch pad to some degree here, or like the launcher core, a lot of these again are caring about flying, but Dooley doesn't have a like mass of flying items, especially even in this expansion that we've gotten here. And yeah, the launcher core is kind of necessary if you're going to go into a flying build. The big payoff, I would say, is going to be the pterodactyl here, which says this with this starts or stops flying, and then you can charge it when you use a dinosaur flying item, and it does 1,000 damage. Obviously, that's really powerful. The thing here is to know is that it's really this tag here of like using a dinosaur. is not going to be that effective with an item like this, just because your dinosaurs naturally are going to have high cooldowns besides like the dinosaur. So really you're trying to play into this flying synergy, and then you have this dinosaur tag, but that's not really how I've seen the item utilized. It's more so you get your flying core and then you kind of go all in if you find the pterodactyl. But again, gold tier flying item, and you have to get the core offered to you, so it's kind of hard to make work. There's also the party float, which is a pretty interesting item. You know, we can make our friends fly, and then we can have shielding from our friends and stuff like that. But this is not really the friends payoff item that you want that I've seen so far in Season 5. There's still Dualtron and stuff like that, what we would rather have. So yeah, overall, I don't think that these items are necessarily bad. It's just that how I have played with them and how I've seen them pan out in other people's boards, I haven't been too impressed, but they still have certainly the potential to do something certainly obscene. And obviously that's going to be for our opponents and not us, right? Anyway, regardless of this, I think that the Mak and Dooley expansions, both of these are nice in that they add more flying items to the game, but they're not necessarily like standout expansions in terms of stuff that's like fun and unique for those heroes, but that's just my opinion. And now that we've talked about their expansions, let's talk about the item updates and get into how they've changed the numbers here. So I'm not going to go through every single point here, but I think there's some really big things to note. And one of those is that so many of Dooley's build around items have been changed to gold tier. Just listing off a few here, we can see that Belly Lista is at gold. Bulldozer is now at gold. We can scroll down here. Combat Core has been buffed a bit, now at core, or now at gold rather. Cybersecurity is at gold. We can see something like the flamethrower is now at gold. The forklift is at gold. Hydraulic press at gold. Ice 9000 at gold. Kinetic cannon at gold. So many of these are now starting at gold tier. And I'll talk about it a little bit more later, but when you start seeing gold tier items is going to change in the Bazaar. So there are going to be less opportunities for you to get gold tier items earlier in the game. So once you're going to hit that like day 6 point now, you're really going to be looking for these gold tier items. And so many of the key ones that we would be building around on Dooley are now at gold tier. So they're going to be way harder to find early on, which in one sense, we can think about how that plays with just having way more items in the item pool for Dooley than they did before. So there could be like this distinct late game versus early game feel to Dooley, where you're going to be finding things that are starting now at bronze tier and stuff like that, that you would maybe not necessarily have found before. And you're going to be playing off those items until you hit the late game point. But there's just so many of the powerful things that you were doing are now only available in the late game. So just keep that in mind, that Dooley before had like a pretty strong early game, I would say, early into the mid game, I would say as well, but they kind of lacked in some ways the like hyper damage that you could get from a Pygmalien or even from the late game builds of Vanessa and even Mak and things like that. So you're kind of more of an early game based hero, in my opinion, either way. But now again, it's kind of like even harder in some sense to transition into those late game builds early on. Mind you, a lot of these gold tier items, they did get reworks or they did get buffs and things of this nature, but it is also the fact that they are now going to be much harder to come by, just because you're not going to be able to get them as early as you would be able to before. So that's just the big overall change to Dooley here. There are, a lot of different numbers, tweaks, and things of that nature to the different items, but just know that if you are going to be looking for some of your most powerful build around items, you're going to want to check to make sure that they're not a gold tier item and you're not searching for them on like day 4 or something like that, or even day 5. Now it is at day 6 where those gold tier items are going to unlock and be more readily available in the item pool. And for the hero overall, I've played a little bit of Dooley on this patch, and I think that I kind of miss the ability to find some of these earlier on, and I do think that hurts the character's overall power level. But that being said, some of what we have gotten in these gold tier buffs is pretty significant for some of these items. So there is a little bit more potential for some of these items to go later game on Dooley compared to what we had before. Now talking about Mak, frankly, we're going to see a lot of the same thing that we saw on Dooley. where a lot of our big build around items are starting at gold tier now. And they do have some numbers changes that are in their favor, like Apothecary. We now get even more regen than we would before and stuff like that. Or Athenor is just going to be doing more burn damage and stuff like that. But again, it is just harder to find these items because they're at that gold tier rarity. So you inherently have to be living longer and things of that nature. So just keep in mind that if you're looking for some of these big build around items, and even some that were not necessarily like the most build around item like Black Ice or something like that, those are at gold tier. Mind you, a lot of them again have had a buff, but overall it's going to be harder to find. So if you're playing, frankly, any of the heroes, but specifically for Mak and Dooley, I would just give this a quick glance to see what's at gold tier now, especially if you are used to like trying to reroll for and aggressively search for specific items before that like day 5 mark. Now, again, on day 6 is where we're going to be having access to these gold tier items. And I would say from what I see here also, this is kind of a big hit to the freeze archetype in some ways, just because a lot of these freeze items now only start at gold tier, and just having they're making them more rare in that way makes it harder to access that freeze archetype, because Mak didn't have too many freeze items to begin with. So just keep that in mind if you're going to be going for that. Also, Pendulum also starts at diamond tier now, which is just something good to know. And then other than that, I would say, Mak has preserved a lot of the same, I would say, stats and gameplay changes. There aren't really a lot of redesigns or anything of that nature on Mak that are of note. It's just that they kind of got the gold tier treatment to a lot of their items, and even something like Sunlight Spear, which is kind of crazy to me to think about. But this is just a new way to be playing the game, kind of switching up what we were used to before, where, again, we're going to hit that power spike once we can actually access gold tier items on day 6. So just keep that all in mind. Now I want to jump into the patch notes, more specifically for Vanessa and Pygmalien. So 2 heroes that didn't get an expansion this time around in the Bazaar, but they did get a lot of item reworks and a lot of buffs and nerfs, frankly, to some of their items. But we can see something like Ambergris is now in a 4-second cooldown, which is really cool. They've changed the blunderbuss. With all that said, there's a lot of that kind of numbers tweaks and changes, and it doesn't make the hero feel like necessarily different, I would say, but I think what it does do is it kind of revitalizes some of the interest that we had in trying other builds for Vanessa specifically. One other thing here is that a lot of large items in the game have now been transferred to gold tier. Large and powerful items, I should say. It's not just all that like 3 slot item. A lot of them have been turned into that gold tier space, which just is good to know if you're like really searching for your electric eels or something like that, expecting it to be at silver tier. Well, now it's at gold. So I would just take a look at the patch notes, if just give them a glance, kind of see how things have changed a little bit if you are really trying to min and max on your runs. Other things that they've done here that I really like are like the lighthouse, where they've redesigned it so it's a little more unique compared to like, it was kind of like what we had with an anglerfish, the deep water anglerfish, I want to say. Either way, so it has 6-second cooldown. It slows an item for 2 and 4 seconds, and then it just has this like static burn clause when you slow. I think that that's pretty nice. Just getting more items that are similar to what they did before, but still provide a pretty powerful build around. And, overall, I would say that they've kind of, I want to say, buffed the ammo archetype on Vanessa a little bit, and it might make it more viable now. So, yeah, I think Vanessa is going to be in a fun spot. A big thing to know is that the shot glasses have been kind of nerfed in what they do, so it hastens slows 3 items instead of all items, which I think is probably best for the character overall, because it was kind of like, well, if you weren't doing the shot glasses thing, then you were maybe doing a suboptimal build, which is not where you want to be. Although there are many viable Vanessa builds, it's just, I think that the shot glasses ones in like the mid game were putting out numbers that were generally way more than your opponents could deal with. Yeah, moving forward here, I can look at Pygmalien. So Pygmalien did, in like Vanessa, receive some nerfs to kind of their most prominent archetypes. So most notably on Pygmalien, as well the Cash Cannon has been nerfed, are the item redesigns, which Pygmalien is my favorite hero. So the item redesigns are really exciting for me, and I think that they're really cool too. So we see that the closed sign, which was something you never used before, has this cool clause: when you heal with an item, charge adjacent properties, so it's actually much better with properties before. And now items like dog and silk scarf have been redesigned into quest items, which I think is pretty cool. So they were kind of like quest items before, in that you were doing a specific task to try and pump up their damage or their shielding amount or whatever it might be. And now it is looking for that, but with the actual quest clause. So for the dog, and frankly, I've seen it be pretty powerful here. This looks like a lot of food, but you can do it pretty quickly, actually. Having like 300 damage on like an 8-second or 7-second cooldown is pretty good in the mid to early game and stuff like that. And then giving it multicast and having it go off even quicker. There's some cool stuff to be done there. Looking at some other changes here, we can talk about like the Pygmalien drum, which starts at gold tier now. I think like showcase builds into Pygmalien drum builds were just super easy and consistent. Well, semi-consistent to pull off before, and now they have been nerfed in that it is harder to find your Pygmalien drum. So you're going to have to sort of figure out the early game and mid game in a different way. But I would say healing builds overall have been really improved on Pygmalien, most notably from kind of 2 items. Money Tree, I think, is one of them, and now it heals equal to triple its value instead of double, so it is just producing way more healing in that capacity. But also we can look at textiles, which is down here. It's going to heal 10, and when you heal with an item, charge adjacent non-healing items 1 second. So there's this kind of really cool textiles. You can use the money tree, and then you can use something like weights next to it, where you're like supercharging your weights next to the textiles, because the weights are going to be charging when you overheal. The textiles charge your weights and stuff like that. So I think that that is all, really powerful. Also, one big nerf here is that yo-yo starts at gold tier, which is woof. I I really like the yo-yo, so it's sad to see it at gold tier, but I do understand that it was genuinely one of the most powerful and broken items that you could get on Pygmalion. But yeah, overall, considerable nerfs to both of these heroes, but also considerable buffs, and ones that I think retain the heroes' identities in a way that they're still pretty fun to play. And there are also ones that I feel a little more fresh than they were before, just because of how the items have been redesigned and reworked. So I'm pretty excited to continue playing these characters. And just to talk about some of the general changes of the game, so this is pretty impactful, frankly. It may look a little innocuous, but I think it is just generally going to change the way that we look and play the game. So that day 1, hour 1, again, we no longer have those special 3 choices that we go and try and pick one of. We just now start with 7 income and 15 gold, which is frankly pretty nice in the way that everyone is on an equal playing field when they start the game. You're not going to have someone who just like high rolled the day 1 infinite combo and there's nothing that you could have ever done against that. You're really in a position where you kind of have to think very thoughtfully about your first couple days, and then once you get into your day 1, day 2, and day 3 fights, it feels like everyone is on a much more equal playing field, which feels pretty good. Also, item drop rates. This change here, I think, is one that you should really pay attention to, which is that gold item and skills now start to show up at day 6 instead of day 5, but they show up in a higher frequency once you hit day 6. So there is kind of like this very noticeable power spike past day 6 in the Bazaar, where once you hit day 6, I would, if you're in your runs, kind of strategize so that you're banking up some money on day 5, so that when you go into day 6, you can aggressively look for these gold tier items. And I will say, again, the gold tier items are kind of like what I feel like the game is being balanced around a little bit more, in that you have a lot of large gold tier items or medium gold tier items that are super powerful, and then they can only start showing up later. Again, we saw something like a yo-yo, we saw something like a Pygmalien drum for Pygmalion. Yeah, that's going to start on day 6 that you can start seeing those items. So you're going to want to have your gold to kind of aggressively reroll and find those items on day 6. It's also good to know here that couple of monsters have been adjusted, so they have different tiers, and they also have different items and abilities on them. They've also introduced a couple new monsters into the game, and I always really like these changes. It just keeps the player versus monster part of the game more interesting, just so that you're not like automatically thinking like, oh yeah, I can defeat the warrior, or oh yeah, I can defeat, well, these are all new. I can defeat the street gamer or ghost pepper or whatever, or I can't defeat the thug. Like there's a lot of different or just switching it up always feels good and keeps the game feeling more fresh. But I will say that if you are wondering what these look like, I'd pull up howbazaar.gg. There's this monsters tab up at the top. Then it has all the new changes for the monsters that are in the game. And I'm gonna click on this one because you should know. Giant mosquito is insane. This one's messed up. this giant mosquito is gonna ruin your day. I'm just letting you know right now. It may look innocuous, but this one has killed me so many times on day 3, and I'm like, oh yeah, I could totally take it. It's like, nah, never had a chance. Other big ones I would say is like the thug. Now it's like really reworked in that they still have the bonk skill and they have this toxic double whammy that does like 1600 damage to you. So just yeah, take a look at these fights if you're thinking of clicking on somebody who might be powerful, because they are reworked and they will mess you up. Okay, so now is probably the part where a lot of you have been waiting for, which is talking about how the game has changed monetization wise. So there's a lot to it, and I'll talk about it in the most fair way that I can. But know that I am a person, I have my biases, and you know, we all have our different opinions, and yours are valid too. So looking at this, the game has been shifted to a premium model. So with that, we are paying $40 for the game if you want to buy the game and you had not bought it before. And this is on Steam as well. So now you can buy the game on Steam, which is really cool. And then the other piece to it is that future heroes are going to be $20 and you cannot use gems to buy future heroes. This is a really important thing to note. So if you're watching this video, I'm going to assume you've already purchased the game, but if you have not, well, hey, I really recommend it. I think it's pretty good. But with that, so this is kind of like all we're going to be paying for in the future is when new heroes come out. When new expansions come out, they're free. We just get them into the game. They're right into the item pool. And we can even see in the Bazaar, you can go to each individual hero, and then like you can go to Mak, and there used to be like a little tab here that said expansions, and it would show you what items are in your pool. But that's no longer there. It's just one big item pool for each one of these heroes. You don't have to purchase those bundles. And if we go to even like the prize pass, those bundles are no longer going to be there. We can see that at like level 15, level 30, it's just this other stuff. We'll get to talking more about the prize pass in a minute, but yeah, this has changed, and now it is also Stelle based for this new season. Another cool thing that we can do is we can see how many people are playing the game. So we can go to steamdb.info, we can go to the Bazaar, and we can see how many people are playing the game specifically on Steam. This does not translate to how many people are utilizing the Tempo launcher. Those are, from my understanding, two separate entities. So this is not the total player count. But if we're looking at this, which is data that we've just never had before, we can see that, yeah, like nearly 8,000 people are playing the game generally at any given time. There's, 7,500 right now. I'm recording this midday on a weekend. So that's pretty cool. We can also see that, it's in the 110 top seller, which if you think about how many Steam games there are and how many people are buying them, that's pretty dang high. And if you're underwhelmed by these numbers, I would also just like go to the front page here of the database that shows like trending games and stuff like that. And yeah, the Bazaar is up there, which is really cool. Also with that, we can kind of see that it's a really popular release. People are playing it. So there is a lot of hype for the game. Like I know a lot of people were like, oh, dead game or whatever, but people said that about Dota 2 for like the entirety of its run. So, this is still, not dead by any stretch of the imagination. And in fact, more and more people are playing the game, as we can kind of see that is rising in terms of the active player base. So one other piece to that here is, you compare it to like a Dota 2, and yeah, there's nearly 700,000 people playing Dota, and there's 7,000 playing the Bazaar. Sure, I know that this is not the next big esport, but I do want to point out that for a game that is just releasing on Steam, this is pretty good. man, no one's told me to say that, and frankly, I really just do feel pretty excited for the future of this game because, in my opinion, it's looking pretty positive just from the data that we see on Steam alone. But with that, I do want to talk about kind of the current monetization system inside the game if you already own it. So it's really nice for the people who have just bought the game on Steam. Welcome. I'm happy that you're here. We used to have to pay for ranked. We used to have like tickets. We didn't have to pay actual money all the time unless you we're not doing so well in your runs. But to play ranked, essentially we would have to spend 100 gems or have a ranked ticket, and now we don't have to do that anymore, which is really cool. Also, there's normal and free play, which you can still earn chests and stuff like that, which is great if you're just getting into the game. I highly recommend normal, especially because it's going to kind of ease you into a lot of the systems and sort of the meta of the game compared to ranked mode. And with that, if you have already purchased the game, again, you are going to have your Pygmalien, Vanessa, and Dooley, which have been unlocked in the base game. And then Mak, if you had Mak before, Mak will be unlocked. And then Stelle is the new character that you can purchase for $20. Again, if you've just gotten the game on Steam, Mak and Stelle are going to be locked to you, and those are going to be a $20 extra purchase. And this is where I have a little bit more to say about kind of the monetization of things. So you have this gem system in the game where you used to be able to convert this gem into purchasing new expansions and new heroes. Well, I guess I should double check on the new hero part, shouldn't I? But regardless, you could use this gem system to purchase different things in the game that attributed to like more items and more expansions in the game. So we don't have that. Now we don't really have anything outside of chests in the marketplace for our gems to work towards. So what we can do is we can go to the Bazaar here, which is, the game, but also that button in that corner there. And we can go to like the daily special, and it's going to have something available for us to buy with gems. And we can purchase that with gems. And then, cool, I've purchased that, I can equip that. Now it's going to show me something different. So with that, you can see that it's daily specials, they're picked from all the unknown gold tier higher collectible item from cosmetic chests. So presumably the more you put into this, the gold tier items, there are not that many of them, so you could kind of like realistically get a lot of the items if you want, if you got a lot of gems. But it's sort of like just this, you are offered one thing. If you don't want that, well, you can wait, however many hours are remaining until you can re-roll again. You can also, if you want to get gems, you can purchase them. And with that, you can also use your gems to, well, that was the wrong button. Use your gems to get chests. Chests have been changed. This is a really big thing to note. So if we click on this eye here in the bottom right hand corner, we can see that these are the drop rates for all the collectibles, but now these chests just contain like every collectible that you could have gotten from the Bazaar in its totality. So these chests can have like anything in them. It's not specifically seasonal based. So there's just a huge pool of items that you can get. And from what they said in the patch notes, like your duplicate items will be transformed into gems, which I don't believe is happening yet. I think they were saying that that's going to happen later, is when your duplicates are transformed. There was going to be a system where if you went to your collection, you could potentially like trade this bayonet or whatever skin you had to another person. And so you could get duplicates of skins like we have here. Like I have this one that has a unique, well, it used to have a unique code to it, where now it just is in there, and eventually these will be transformed into gems from my understanding. So there is still the ability to get duplicates of cosmetics currently, but from what I understand, that will be changed in the future. But one big thing about all this is that we just don't really have like a big thing for our gems to work towards. We have the ability to still, get XP on this challenge bar here, like our daily challenges that will translate into the prize pass, but we can't buy tiers on the prize pass anymore. And additionally, like there's not much that you would really want to buy on the prize pass, if I'm being honest with you. You get so many different types of rugs. I mean, hey, if you really like that rug, that's cool. But right now we don't have like a super big thing for our gems to work towards, and you're going to get a lot of gems and chests from this prize pass naturally. But outside of like utilizing it specifically on chests or this bazaar piece right here, we aren't really saving it for anything that is like going to directly affect our in-game experience, which has its pros and cons, right? Like we are no longer in this what some people coined as like a pay-to-play era where you are paying for an advantage to have your expansions. But at the same time, like if you're someone like myself, I naturally just like to keep building up my gems so that I can then afford like the next expansion in when it comes out, and that's like a pretty big motivator for me to keep playing the game. Also to hit legend, I do like doing that and just putting out videos for you all. But right now we don't really have kind of like a huge incentive to, you know, put our gems towards, which I'm not going to say is a bad thing, but it's just something that is fundamentally different about the game. You know, looking at the future of gems, I imagine that we'll put something in the game for us to put our gems towards. But you know, currently where it stands, I think the system needs a little bit of reworking. Again, not bad, not great in my opinion, but just something that I think, as they've shown, they're very willing to work on. How the kind of monetization system works in the game and try and optimize it for the players. And I think that they have overall swung in the direction of hearing what people have to say about the monetization system and trying to make it better for the players. So I'm interested to see what they do with all of that next. And one final thing here is just talking about the actual price point itself. You know, for a new player, $40, I think personally can be a kind of steep price point for getting into a game that has, you know, kind of like super auto pets and something like that, which is free to play, which is an auto battler. I think Bazaar, frankly, I'll be honest, and I know obviously I'm biased because I play this so much, but I do think it is worth the price tag. But I can completely understand why someone would not feel that way. And I can completely understand why $40 would be too high a barrier to entry. I would then wish list this game if you were thinking about it. But with that, I think it might be tough for a new player to look at that $40 price tag and then also see that they would have to pay another $20, $40 to kind of get the full game itself. Mind you, I've probably put more hours into the Bazaar than any of the other games that I have in Steam at this point. But all that said, it is pretty steep, and I've gotten my money back for sure. It's just, it is a steep amount of money potentially to pay for a new player. But again, I do feel like the game is great, and if you do want to play it, now is a really good time to get into the game. So just wrapping up here, you know, I think first and foremost, the play experience of the game is in a really awesome spot right now. I think that what they've made item-wise changes to the game have all been really cool and really impactful in the way that we play the Bazaar. I think that, you know, the monetization system and the gem system is going to need some work, but it's not to say that they can't do it and aren't doing it. I have imagined that they are going to be working on it as we talk about all the ways in which they could change it. And I trust them to tempo make a really awesome product that we can all be really happy and enjoy playing. I think this is a really strong and positive start to season 5. I think it also shows that they are planning to try and, you know, make the game as best that it can be, and it's in a really good spot for what it is. And even going past that, you know, I know that the monetization point of $40 could be a lot for some folks to get into, but if you're thinking about getting into the game, I think it is really worth it and you will get your money out of it. All that said, you know, I think looking to the future, I am really excited to see what other expansions they add to the game and to see that they're putting in new mechanics and new heroes. You know, this is all positive stuff that ultimately makes me happier to keep continuing to play and put out content for the Bazaar. So I'll leave it all at that. I thank you all for watching. You know, if you want to support me, you can feel free to like, you can feel free to subscribe, and I would love to hear what you think about all of this down below. And with that, I hope you have a great rest of your day or evening. Bye-bye.